Hello YouTube. Today's video will be a reading from The Secret Practices of the Sufi Freemasons, the Islamic Teachings at the Heart of Alchemy by Baron Rudolf Von Sebbotendorf. Translated, and the translation and introduction are done by Stephen Flowers, Ph.D. I highly recommend his work. Lords of the Left-Hand Path is an absolutely fantastic read. He has a number of interviews that you could find on YouTube for free to see if you like his style. His writing is extremely concise, as you will see here. Music by the Menahan Street Band. It is precisely 5:58 Pacific Standard Time, November 2nd, 2016. The Bektashi sect of Sufism. Islam. In order to understand the Bektashi sect of Sufism and its place in the work of the science of the key, we must come to some understanding of the history and ideas of both Islam and Sufism in general. Islam is obviously considered one of the world's great religions. It now claims approximately 1.5 billion adherents worldwide, just over 50 countries, stretching from Morocco to Indonesia, have Islam as their official religion. As a religion, it has spread farther and faster than any known to history. Its founder, Muhammad, 567 through 632, personally oversaw the conquest and conversion of his native Arabia. During his lifetime, he dictated texts that were written down as the Quran, the recitation, edited and compiled some 19 years after the death of the Prophet. The essence of Islam is submission of the will to God, for the very word Islam means submission in Arabic. The most essential doctrines of Islam are the 5 pillars of faith, the Shalat, the practice of 5 daily prayers and prostrations, 2, the Zakat, or obligatory almsgiving, 3, Sawn, which is fasting from dawn to dusk during the month of Ramadan, 4, Hajj, or pilgrimage to Mecca, and 5, Shahadat, or profession of faith. Quote, there is no God but Allah and Muhammad is his prophet, unquote. This makes Islam originally and essentially simpler than Judaism or Christianity. Performing these obligatory practices is the core of Islam as originally practiced. Historically, Islam spread out from Arabia in the wake of military conquest to the east and west of the Arabian Peninsula. Egypt fell in 641, and by 711 Muslims had invaded the European continent and conquered Visigoth Spain. The vast Persian Empire was brought into the Islamic world between 650 and 750 of the Common Era. Around the year 1000, Muslims made significant inroads into India. From there, Islam staged further expansion eastward. From early times in the history of Islam, the religion was practiced by many non-Arabic peoples, most notably Persians. The Persians were among the world's most intellectual and sophisticated peoples at the time they were conquered by the relatively unlearned Bedouin Arabs. Persian cultural influence, already great in Arabia for centuries, would play a key role in the rapidly developing Islamic intellectual culture of the 8th and 9th centuries. The Turkic people had generally converted to Islam by the 9th century. They are a non-Arabic, originally nomadic group of people, originally inhabiting regions in central northern Asia. During the 11th century, they made significant conquests into Asia Minor against the Byzantine Empire, which the Muslims called Rum or Rome. The Seljuk Turks, taking of Jerusalem from the Arabs, and their victory over Byzantium at the Battle of Manzikert in 1071 marked the beginning of a Turkish onslaught on Europe, which reached its peak in 1683 at the Battle of Vienna. Here the Turks were defeated and turned back from the heart of Central Europe. By this time, the Ottoman Turks had conquered the entire Balkan region of Europe, including present-day Greece. In practical military and strategic terms, it was against the beginning of this invasion that the so-called Crusades were originally aimed. Christendom was under attack in the west, Spain, and in the east, Balkans, and the response was to counterattack the Holy Land. Following initial success under the Normans beginning in 1098, the Crusades eventually collapsed after repeated campaigns, and the Christians were eventually pushed out of the region in 1291. These 2 centuries of conflict between Christendom and Islam, which still leave their marks upon contemporary history, had one unintended consequence: the exposure of Christians to Islamic ideas and culture. Similarly, Islamic ideas entered into Christendom from the West and Spain. These ideas were philosophical. The Muslims had preserved Greek philosophy and science at a level unknown in Europe: scientific, technological, mathematical, as well as mystical and even romantic. The Muslims also enjoyed many luxuries that wealthy Europeans wanted. Christian secular lords and the kings and their knights who fought in the Crusades knew and respected their enemies, unlike the religious fanatics who saw in Islam only a form of devil worship. It was through these secular doors that Islamic technology, magic, and mysticism entered into Europe. The secret of Islamic advancement was its originally lax attitude toward individual thought. As long as a man met his religious obligations, he was free to think about a wide variety of things, as long as it did not lead to outward questioning of Islam, the Prophet, or the supremacy of his book, the Holy Quran. In the medieval West, by contrast, there was official religious control on virtually every aspect of philosophy, art, science, and all venues of culture. Islamic intellectual freedom preserved its cultural and military supremacy for centuries. At the dawn of the Western modern age, just before 1500 CE, things began to shift. There was a renaissance of pagan or pre-Christian philosophy in Europe. The Muslims were eventually pushed back out of Europe. The Spanish completed their reconquest of their country in 1492, and the Turks were left with only one small foothold in Europe around Constantinople, Istanbul. Increasingly, the Muslims were seized by a religious fundamentalism exemplified by the Wahhabist sect, and they lost their intellectual edge. It was during this period that the balance of intellectual and scientific power shifted from the Islamic superiority to European secular superiority. This shift is again seminal to understanding our times. Sadly, the Islamic world went from being the richest and most advanced culture in the world to one of relative poverty and cultural deprivation. To illustrate this shift, it has been noted that if the economic impact of petroleum is removed from the economic calculations dealing with the 50 or so Islamic countries, all of them together would have a combined gross domestic product less than that of any one of several small northern European countries. Sufism. Sufism is the best known esoteric or mystical dimension within the religion of Islam. Its definition is difficult, its origin obscure, and its history is fraught with contradictory sects and teachings. Sebbotendorf purported to represent the esoteric practice of one order within the larger Sufi world, that of the Bektashis. But in order to grasp the importance of this, a general overview of Sufism is needed. The word Sufi is most likely derived from Suf, the Arabic word for wool, and is reference to the woolen garments early adherents of these doctrines wore as insignia. Supposedly, members of Muhammad's own entourage are among the earliest of the Sufis. For example, Salman, Muhammad's Persian barber, whom he had adopted. In general, Sufism may be defined as a mystical branch of Islam that seeks direct and personal knowledge and experience of God. This is opposed to the simple acceptance of the Quran and obedience to the laws of outward Islamic practice. Because Islam arose and spread through many lands, each with its own religious and mystical traditions, it would be difficult to imagine that these would not have left their marks in the Islamic culture over the centuries. Sufism becomes a general feature of Islamic culture that was capable of absorbing spiritual ideas, teachings, and practices from other cultures as they were being politically annexed in the expansion of Islam. These influences came from many such diverse sources as Christianity, Neoplatonism, Manichaeism, Zoroastrianism, Buddhism, and Hinduism. The latter-day Bektashi sect, into which Sebbotendorf was initiated, may have been largely eclectic and universalistic. However, in this it is carrying on an ancient tradition of bringing together disparate practices into an Islamic or Sufi context. As might be imagined, there were many, often cross-fertilizing orders of Sufism in the Middle Ages. The earliest phase of Sufism was characterized by its asceticism. For example, the teachings of Hassan al-Basri, died 728 in the Common Era, or Ibrahim bin Adham of Eastern Iran, died 777 in the Common Era. Following this, there were a multitude of Sufi masters who seem to have arisen in Iran. It seems that they often came from the easternmost part of the region beyond the Oxus River. Not all of the early Iranian Sufis were very orthodox in their views. In fact, Hussein ibn Mansur al-Hallaj was executed for his teachings. Another Iranian, al-Ghazali, died 1111, is credited with healing the rift between Sufism and orthodoxy. This ushered in the greatest age of Sufism, exemplified by Ibn Arabi, 1165 through 1241, the Persian Shihabuddin Yahaja Surawardi, 1155 through 1191, Muhammad Jalal al-Din, better known as Rumi or the Roman, 1207 through 1273. Second of these met the same fare as al-Hallaj, martyrdom for his beliefs. The last of these, Rumi, is one of the most popular figures produced by Islam. He founded a Sufi order, Tariqa, in Asia Minor, which eventually became known in Turkish as the Mevlana order. These are the famous whirling dervishes. The Bektashi Order, a contemporary of Rumi, Haj Bektash Veli, 1209 through 1271, was from Nishpur in northeastern Iran and was driven from his home by Mongol invasions when they went to Asia Minor. There he founded a sect of Sufis that bears his name, the Bektashis. They were part of the Alevi movement in Asia Minor, the members of which worship in assembly houses, Turkish semevi, have ceremonies which include music and dance, conduct rituals together with women, and use vernacular languages, not necessarily Arabic, for philosophical discourse and poetry. The Alevi movement is marked by its spirit of tolerance and egalitarianism. Over time, the Bektashi openness to outside influences made it a ready-made tool for cultural mystical syncretism. Another essential piece in the puzzle presented by the contents of Sebbotendorf's book is the role of Hurufism in the Bektashi Tariqat. Hurufism means letterism. The founder of the Hurufis was the Persian Fazl Allah Astarabadi, 1340 through 1394, who wrote in his native language under the name Naimi. He, as was the case with several other Sufi pioneers, was martyred by orthodox interests. It is the basic idea of Hurufism that God reveals himself in the word, and that the word is made up of sounds or letters with accompanying numerical values. These are made manifest in the human body through certain exercises. One who has gained proficiency in this may be able to act in a godlike manner. Additionally, we can recognize influences from the Qalandaria order, founded by Yusuf al-Andalusi, died 1070 in Spain. This order is marked by antinomian practices, the consumption of intoxicants, and the use of gambling and games. It also practices something called shahed bazi, witness play, which involves, in part, the contemplation of the beauty of the human body. The Bektashi Order was the official sect of the Turkish Janissaries, an elite fighting force within the Turkish army made up of originally non-Muslim boys who fell into Turkish hands. The Janissaries were active from 1365 to 1826, when they were disbanded due to the great influence they had gained in Turkish politics. During their long history, the Janissaries were most prominent in the Balkan region. It appears that over time, the Bektashi sect or order developed in two directions, with some embracing the more heretical aspects of the order more than others. This had led to a general opinion or feeling among more orthodox Muslims that there are bad Bektashis and good ones. In some versions, however, all Bektashis are bad. In fact, of course, it is merely a matter of historical development. One thing that appears to enrage Orthodox Muslims the most is that the so-called bad Bektashis accept even Jews among them. The fact that the Termudi clan who befriended Sebbotendorf were Jews speaks to the fact that these were indeed the bad Bektashis. Some Bektashis have embraced not only Alevi practices, but that of Harufism as well. It should be noted that in 1925, Kemal Ataturk banned all Sufi orders as a part of secularizing the nation of Turkey. Due to their nature, however, such orders survived and later resurfaced unscathed. From the Secret Practices of the Sufi Freemasons, The Islamic Teachings at the Heart of Alchemy, by Baron Rudolf Von Sebbotendorf. Some of you will be familiar with his work in creating the Thule, Thule Society. Yes, when it was still the cabal that fundamentally was at the basis of the German Workers' Party, prior to the German Workers' Party changing into something quite different under the Austrian artist and intellectual Adolf Hitler. I'll be reading maybe a bit more about along this strain, but most likely that's all I'll be reading of that. I highly recommend Stephen Flower's version of this writing. It's very even-handed. Obviously, Stephen Flowers has very differing views on Islam than I do, but it is a very valuable source text that pretty much is the only thing I have found in Western society that actually has a application of meditation according to Neoplatonist and Pythagorean-based planet alchemy. There we go.